Welcome back. So, South Africa celebrates 3 decades of freedom today. The journey towards the liberties we cherish, including the freedom to move, speak and associate, owes itself to the sacrifices of our liberation heroes. And as we mark 30 years of freedom and democracy, reflection, of course, is inevitable and needed, right? Despite being Africa's most developed economy, South Africa grapples with deep-rooted issues such as widening inequality, pervasive poverty and staggering unemployment rates. Well, we're going to dissect the state of our nation 30 years in, and for that I'm joined by thought leaders who grew up in this democracy. We're joined by political commentator Ayanda Sishi-Wigzel. She joins us in studio. Ayanda, good morning to you. We're joined by socio-political content creator Darren Campher, who joins us digitally. We're also joined by performance artist and activist Qondiswa James digitally, and in studio we are with the Legal Researcher Nkhanyiso Nqgulunga. Guys, thank you so much for joining us, and a good morning to you. You know, I want to start with a piece that you've done, Qondiswa, that I think in your own way describes how you, perhaps how you see the country. Let's take a look at Qondiswa's work.
The Speaker of the National Assembly, Ms. Nasibiwe Mapisa Ngagula, Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Mr. Amos Masondo, Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Paul Mashatile and Mrs. Mashatile, former President Thabo Mbeki, former Deputy President Zile Mlambo Ngcuka.
Democracy for who? I've got goosebumps just watching that video, Qondiswa. Talk to us about why you did that work and what you wanted us to think, really, as we watched you.
Sure. Good morning. Thanks for having me. Well, that work is a series which I've been doing for the year, sort of around the country, mostly between Cape Town and Johannesburg, where I'm essentially trying to think through what is a way that I can participate, right, beyond voting, because I have questions about being able to really only participate according to the system every 4 years, and questions about what we do in the intervening 4 years, right? And what are the ways, if we say we're in a democratic country or we are in a democratic institution, what are the ways besides the voting every 4 years that we can contest, that we can exercise our right to participate? So the work essentially is me trying to speak to around through the elections, trying to speak back, trying to contest in my own way, and trying to speak to other people around me, try to speak to other citizens and see, because for me the provocation as well is that, yeah, it's a democracy, but it's kind of a tattered, impoverished sort of liberation, if it is, something like that. So trying to see in public space how people are feeling about this, how people are thinking. I mean, I speak to a lot of people about voting, what they're going to do with their vote, if they're going to vote at all, if they're going to register at all. And regardless of where people fall on that scale, my thing is always, my provocation to them is, okay, yes, but are you finding ways to participate and to contest in general? Yeah,
I think one of the things that I see in that piece that you've done is, I suppose, you know, even with the flag in your mouth and the sort of gagging that you're doing, I get the sense that there's, you know, an expression of the frustration also of being South African and not getting the resolution to the promises that we want to see come true for ourselves, right? And I'm going to bring it to our guest here in studio as well. Ayanda, thank you so much for joining us, and a good morning to you. One of our reporters is obviously in the Eastern Cape watching the celebrations. One of the questions I asked is, where's the turnout, you know? Are the people coming out in the numbers to see the celebration of 30 years of democracy? What do you say to whether or not South Africans care even about today?
People care. They do care. But we care for different reasons, because there was a need for this day to happen. There was a need for democracy. But however, we had just watched a video now where we see how our democracy is choking us. It's gagging us. We cannot breathe under this democracy right now. because young people are so burdened in this country. People in general are burdened in this country. This democracy came with a lot of promise. It came with a lot of expectations. And we have not met those expectations because of the reality of the situation that is on the ground right now. I know that people will turn out for those democracy celebrations, right? Of course they will. But that is not a true indication about what it is that our country is currently going through right now and the issues that we are facing on the ground. People showing up the stadium politics, the rally politics, it is inconsequential to the socio-economic issues that are happening on the ground. I'm talking about people who have to line up in hospital and clinics and are dying while seeking health care. This happened in the community of KwaMashu in KZN, where I am from. You have children in the Eastern Cape who are now having to have, within the feeding scheme in school that they have, having to run a stock file. These are kids between the ages of 8 and 9, having to run a stock file in the feeding scheme in the schools that they already are existing in, so that one child will have a little bit more of the food, and then the next day another child will have a little bit more of the food. This is how children are thinking about when it comes to hunger, because they need to protect themselves within the schooling system. Now imagine the children who are not in the schooling system, in the schooling infrastructure. We heard this week of a child in the Eastern Cape who died in a pit latrine toilet, and we have the MEC of Education from the Eastern Cape attacking an NGO because of that very issue. It's harrowing, the problems that we have in this country. In the subsequent 30 years of democracy, it is not enough to solve the issues that we have. I can concur to that, but in the same vein, we can say that the resources that come from our government have not been allocated properly in order to solve the infrastructure issues and the socio-economic issues, which has resulted in this gargantuan problem that we have right now.
Yeah. You know, I'm just sitting and thinking about children having a food stockpile just so they can feed themselves. That's really, really sad.
In KZN, when you look at the poverty projections, the levels of poverty in KZN, in South Africa, children between the ages of 0 and 17 years old are 63% of children are living in abject poverty. But in the province of KZN, that number shoots up to 67%, which means that children between the ages of 0 and 17 are having to make the choice between, do I eat, or do I get basic toiletries, or do I have to dress myself? Imagine having to have the choice between having to make the choice, do I eat, do I feed myself, or do I have transport money in order to go to school? These are the things that young people are dealing with. They are crossing torrid rivers of like really violent waters in order to get to school. This is what our democracy has produced. It is something that has come from the advent of apartheid. Yes, we understand these socioeconomic circumstances that where we come from, but our democracy was promised to us in order to fix these issues, and they failed to do that.
You know, one of the things that we do a lot in South Africa, Nkhanyiso, I'll bring you in here, is we say, but we're resilient, aren't we? South Africans are resilient. Despite these challenges, we continue to keep going. We're resilient. Does that message land?
I mean, I think it's come from a place of more like understanding that the government is not really available to assist us in any way. So people have looked for alternative ways in order to survive. I mean, it's most likely to happen when government is just so divorced from the realities of most South Africans. Because our democracy is this very big concept that is built on the Constitution. And the Constitution says this is the kind of society that we envisage. This is a just society. We have the preamble that encapsulates those values. But have we achieved those things 30 years later? I mean, I think for most people, they'll tell you that it's still elusive. It's still more or less like a dream, because although there have been some stuff that's been done by the government to ensure that people's lives are improved, houses and so forth, but the economic situation and inequalities are deepening every day. I mean, most South Africans, I mean, almost 55% of them live living less than $1 a day. I mean, that's the abject poverty in South Africa, the security issue in South Africa, the lack of involvement of the state to be involved. I mean, there's an energy problem, there's water problems in the country, and the state does not seem to have a plan, even a 10 or 5-year plan on what they intend to do about that. And people go out there and look for alternatives, alternatives energy and alternative. But the problem with that is that now we are this divided society within the one South Africa, it's a tale of this dichotomy between the rich and the poor. And unfortunately, because the government is so divorced from this reality, that's why South Africans are viewed to be resilient, notwithstanding our issues that we have.
Yeah. You talk about the energy crisis, and I almost want to bring it into, load shedding and where we are right now in dealing with that. And we'll get there, because what you hear as well from, say, the Minister of Electricity saying to us, well, we've got a good maintenance plan. We've had 30 days of no load shedding, so we're making some progress. Do people believe that? And we'll get to that in a moment. But you talked about the preamble, our constitution, whether or not we live up to the values of that. And this is where I want to bring in Darren Campher here, who is a socio-political content creator. One of the things that's happened, I think, over the past perhaps 5 years, is that South Africans have started questioning even the integrity of that very document. And I've said over and over again that document was hard won by South Africans pre-1994. And today we question that very document. How do we keep that conversation going of saying, well, it does hold integrity in your view, Darren?
I don't know. I think it's very difficult to answer that, because what the document says and what people experience are two very different things. And I think the reason for that, I know we place a lot of emphasis on the government, but I just see the government as the administration arm of the market economy. And for 30 years, the market economy has been doing quite well. Our all-share index has been on the increase, yet people's labor and wages have not been on par. And so I think we can look at all the things that the document offers us, but South Africans are not experiencing it. It's a nice theory, but as the previous guest just said, that 55% of people are living in poverty. So if the majority of this country is struggling, I don't know who it is that's celebrating. At best, we can maybe commemorate this day, and then we should look at what work we still have outlined, but I don't think we're done. I think we've moved on from the crime that was apartheid, but I don't think we've fully reversed or done away with the system that we had inherited. We got a system where your labor was undervalued. If you wanted to get somewhere, you needed to have money, but nobody had money. If you wanted some kind of financial security, you needed to have land, but nobody had land. And so we were thrust into a system where we were disadvantaged. And so 30 years on, there wasn't that kind of aggressive reversal that was necessary. We use the term democracy, but democracy needs equality.
Yeah.
Democracy needs everybody's decision-making power and level of understanding of the system to be on the same level, and we don't have that, not by far.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we can use the term democracy just yet.
I want to challenge you guys a little bit, though, if you'll allow me, right? Quickly, and just 10 seconds each. Your highest level of education, if you're willing to disclose that with us.
Oh yeah, 2 degrees.
2 degrees. Yeah. Yourself, Ayanda?
No degree.
No degree, but highly educated.
Highly educated.
Highly educated. Now, the reason why I ask you that question is to say to you, well, the government can easily argue that Dinzwalo does exist.
Oh, no.
No, but here's what I'm bringing on the table here. Pre-30 years ago, you would not have been able to get those 2 degrees. You would not have been able to be this outspoken, bold woman that you are able to express yourself as today. Mm-hmm. What do you say to that? Because essentially, even as we celebrate 30 years of democracy, we're celebrating 30 years of South Africa post all of that limitation that black people particularly used to have in this country. Does that not count for you?
No, it doesn't. I'm going to tell you why.
Yeah.
It's because we are the exception. I'm the exception. Nkhanyiso is the exception. Darren is the exception. Qondiswa is the exception. We are the exception. Majority of black people are not where we are sitting right now.
Yeah.
I fell sick. That's the reason why I couldn't even complete my degree. So the problem here that we have is that we are the exception. But we shouldn't be the exception. We should be the norm. And so long as young people are seen, who are sitting in these spaces, are seen as the exception and not the norm, we are going to have serious problems in this country, because majority of people should be able to be going to school. Majority of people shouldn't be begging for NSFAS. They shouldn't be having to go for loans and signing huge bank loans and Standard Bank for us in order for us to access higher education. It shouldn't be that we have to know somebody within our network of our family of friends in order for us to get an internship, to get a job in spaces in an economy that honestly for the past 300 years has kept us out of accessing the economy and practicing and our means of production. And we cannot expect in the subsequent 30 years of democracy that we have had that now we can celebrate and say that we are now equal, we are now in university, because we still are fighting to access those spaces. We're still fighting to go to school. We're still fighting for primary school children in order to get access to education and to creche and for early childhood development. So long as we are still crossing rivers in order to go to school, so long as children are still dying from lack of safe transportation on roads, there's no such thing as Zintwalo.
And of course, we continue with our panel here in studio. Ayanda Sishi-Wigzel, who is a political contributor, Darren Campher, who is a socio-political content creator, Qondiswa James, who is a performance artist and activist as well, and Nkhanyiso Nqgulunga, who is a legal researcher. Nkhanyiso, I'm going to bring this one to you. As we saw the Justice Minister come up on the screen there, you know, faces as well. I mean, Ayanda saying, okay, well, here we go again. We're going to get the same sort of rhetoric that we get from politicians. Ayanda touches on how South Africa is the country that went all the way to the International Court of Justice in support of the plight of Palestinians. We have presented ourselves to the world as what some would say a moral voice where justice is concerned. But let's talk about access to justice for the average South African and where that sits, right? As they watch our international plight and the role we play in global geopolitics, are they seeing that sort of same energy in-house? I think about how, for instance, gender-based violence crimes see very little conviction. In fact, well below 10% of those crimes are convicted. That's a staggering number when you think about it. So let's talk about that. Access to justice, are we telling the right story?
Yes, I mean, it's quite an indictment for the government, because all of these guarantees that the Constitution of South Africa, for all South Africans, that we need access to justice. I mean, in fact, it's a right in the Constitution that access to justice, you know. But it's about you being able to afford that access to justice. You know, the best lawyer that you can get for you to be able to get adequate legal representation in courts or to get your rights affirmed. So, but what's happening here is that you have a range of issues. You've got crime, you've got GBV in the country, and the government has not really invested so much when it's come to investigative powers by the police to ensure that investigations are done and issues go to court and they are prosecuted and ultimately someone is convicted of a crime. Because what you find is that the system has an imbalance, is that sometimes it's not really the court, but sometimes it's the police. When someone comes and reports the case and the police wants to argue with them, or they completely misunderstand their experience or downplay their experience. And remember, the prosecution has to build the case on what's based on the police reports, and it has to go to court, and the court standards is pretty higher for someone who's trying to access justice. As a result, many victims get deterred to even come forward and report because their cases get thrown out. DNA and evidence, the handling of that is terrible at the moment. So, and government, because of the austerity measures, budget cutting measures for the last 10 years, has not really invested in this infrastructure, has not really invested in the police. So that's why now, even now, we have the police in KZN executing criminals because the government has found an easy way out into the crisis. You know, it's much more easy when the Minister of Police comes forward and say, oh, we've executed 9 criminals, but there were only 2 guns found. You know, it's because it's an easy way out, is that the government now endorses state violence and police vigilantism. And we know the relationship that South Africa inherently is a very violent country. So we are continuing and perpetuating the cycle of violence, and spearheaded by the very same government, because they failed in every step of the way. Communities feel betrayed. Communities do not trust the state institutions and politicians. They are disillusioned about our democracy. They are disillusioned about what's happening. So that's why now is pointing a finger at the Constitution. Now everyone is pointing a finger in the courts. But the question is, have we really tested these things? Is the government doing much to ensure that what this progressive realization of rights that are in the Constitution, of which is encapsulate the values of South Africa's democracy, are we going to be at the near future realize those things, or it just becomes a dream that we are still trying to see if we are going to materialize?
You know, I think about what we tell the world, again, right? That we are this voice of justice on the globe, right? And the brand South Africa that we share with the world. But at the same time, that brand is well known by the world as the rape capital of the world. This is what we're known as. Travel anywhere in the world and people tell you that they know it's not safe to be a woman or a child in South Africa. Qondiswa, I'm going to bring this one to you. Why can't we get gender-based violence off our back? What is it that we're struggling with? That 30 years into democracy, we seem to be looking at a problem that's worsening instead of getting better. What are we doing wrong, Qondiswa?
I mean, the gender-based violence question is very, very, very big. And in like a 1-minute response, I don't know if I can quite tackle. I mean, there's a lot of things, right? It's like, who are the actors, the players involved, and what is like their involvement? So for me, it's a balance between, sure, government and institutions, but also communities and people who belong in those communities, and how it is that communities have been constituted. And that if we are building the so-called New South Africa on a bedrock of violence and violence encounters, and if also then the institution isn't shifting adequately to allow people proper agency to build confidence to whatever, then there's places in society where this gets put, right?
Yeah.
So there's the gender-based violence, but you also look at, for example, the xenophobic violence that happens. And I mean, even with gender-based violence, I'd like to also specifically name like queer femicide and like queer violence, queer-based violence. And especially when we say, for example, that the Constitution, the Civil Marriages Act, everybody can get married, etc. But when you look in the communities, queer people are getting killed every day for loving. So it's like, what actually in South African society, and maybe it's got something to do with the conservativeness of South African society, but also it also happens more in specific spaces, right? And these are spaces that we've already understood are spaces of violence, for example, townships. And it's like, if the environment that's set up around people that people must like live in and must try to build life in, basically kind of says back to you that there is no way out, that these are the languages that you have, right, to build society. These are the things that happen. And for me, like this question about femicide is because there are also people who are trying to do things, right? But the slow gains that happen, and I think it's also because when you see people in positions of power also getting away with particular kind of harassment, like being able to harass and get off scot-free, and it's seeming like there's more of a focus on this in terms of what people are trying to sort out than another thing. I think also sends the wrong message, right? That like there's a lot of conversation, especially from power, about particular things that are happening, but then there are double standards also that are set in place. Like, I know this is also not popular, but for me, I always go back to the fact that like South Africa voted in Jacob Zuma just on the back of his rape trial, which I found incredible. I found that incredible. And we did that, right? We as the South African community, we did that. And even if I'm looking now at like, okay, we're going to vote in like the next month and wondering how South Africans are going to exercise this thing, because essentially the vote, you are giving away power to someone else to act on your behalf for 4 years, which is also something that I deeply question, right? Like, are there particular moments where we can assert ourselves, where we can do agency, where we can do power as people, right? In relation to femicide, but also in relation to everything in general, getting ourselves out of impoverishment, getting ourselves into rooms with government to force their hand, right? And me thinking, I think I know what's going to happen with this election, and wondering like what it is about. Is it a comfortability in our apathy? Is it the fact that like we feel we are not listened to? We feel like we don't actually have avenues to be able to act or to be able to contest or whatever.
Yeah.
But I wonder what it is that still somehow makes us do what I feel is going to inevitably happen, which is put power back in the hands of the people that we no longer trust.
You know, perhaps I'm an optimist, you know, and Darren, I'm going to come to you for this one. Perhaps I'm an optimist and I say, yes, we've gotten a lot of things wrong, and but there are a few things that we have done right, particularly in how the world views us, right? I mean, that step of going towards the ICJ, going to the ICJ to fight for the plight of Palestinians is something that cannot be downplayed. And I think that, Darren, perhaps you can come in here. I wonder if we see that South Africa on a global scale is really right up there in deciding on the future of global politics. Darren?
So firstly, it's always nice to have some gaslighting from our government on a Saturday morning. I think that when it comes to the ICJ case, I see it this way. Sadly, I see it as a PR stunt because Israel has made it clear they're not going to listen to anybody. Secondly, I see it as a double standard because we've taken Israel to court on a global stage, but we have Zionist billionaires funding political parties in this country. We have Zionist schools who are recruiting military personnel right out of schools here. And then we have Zionist organizations protesting at our universities. So on a global scale, we've decided as a country, this is how we feel about this. But in our own borders, on our own land, Zionists are shopping around for people. They are investing in our political parties. They are guiding our policy with their money. And so I feel like if anybody on an international stage really looked at us, they would ask us what's going on, because this doesn't make sense.
Darren, you want to step in, Nkhanyiso?
Yeah, I believe like two things can be true at the same time. I think going to the ICJ and representing certain values of Nelson Mandela as the stream of democracy in South Africa's constitution. And I think one thing that as South Africans we do not realize is that we actually the example of many older democracies around the world, because we are the actual democracy, even though the modernized world in the West, we do sometimes do things better than them because we recognize the human rights issues in the country. So we do have issues in the country. I think also at the same time we must recognize that we're going to have to coexist with certain voices that you do not agree with. And I think that's the essence of our democracy, is that all of those people will have to exist. So that's why today we have got political parties that are campaigning on certain values and social reforms that otherwise we fought so hard for. Yeah. I mean, you have political parties like Patriotic Alliance that says they're going to go to hospitals and switch off machines of immigrants, you know. And I mean, that's dangerous. That goes against our values and what we believe in. We've got so many political parties like the MK and what they stand for. They want to reverse the rights of queer people. So that's what they say they stand for. Yeah. And unfortunately, we have to coexist with those dissenting voices in our democracy. So as South Africans, we must recognize that what is the South Africa we want and what is the future we want for ourselves? Yeah. What are those values that we want to uphold, you know, as a country?
Unfortunately, we're running out of time and I need to start winding it down. I know it really, really flew, unfortunately. But I'm going to get closing thoughts from each and every one of you. And Qondiswa, so I want to start with you. In a month and 2 days' time, we go into yet another election. 30 years after we voted the African National Congress into power, voted in this democracy, this freedom that we've been talking about for 30 years. What is it that political parties should be saying to the electorate in the next month, Qondiswa? Let me start there. And are they speaking the right language to you?
So for me, I put no stock as the kind of, I guess, politics that I am. I put no stock in these political parties, personally. For me, I'm always trying to speak to people, like us sitting here on this panel, and then other people on different various grounds in different communities, asking what can we do for ourselves, because very clearly these people will get voted in. They're going to say whatever it is that we want them to say, whoever it is who gets voted in, and it's just going to do the same thing that they've been doing, which is to not give us access, which is not to resource us. Yeah. So like, my whole thing is, we should be looking at ways in which we can actively be governing ourselves, maybe making the government in a way obsolete, or if they are supposed to be the administrative arm, how do we hold them to account to be the administrative arm? This thing of this next month is it's a PR stunt, a general PR stunt, right? And for me, I'm not interested in this, and I'm not interested in them. I'm interested in us.
Okay.
And just saying to people, like, just be careful. Don't just listen to stuff and get a nice shirt and get nice KFC and just vote. Like,
Okay.
really think about
All right,
it. And then after the road to voting
I need to
instance,
jump in.
Please, can you still participate beyond just the voting?
Darren, same question, but 30 seconds, please.
Sure. I would actually rather want to address the South African public and remind them that the state are our employees and we should treat them as such. And if they're not performing, we should use our collective power and get rid of them, whether it's in 5 years or 1 year. We don't have the time or the luxury to wait till the next election.
Yeah, Ayanda?
The audacity and gall of the Minister of Justice to say that this economy is inclusive of young people and everybody, my goodness, Darren is right. We are being gaslit in this country and we are highly disrespected as a citizenry and as a people in general. I sort of echo what Qondiswa was saying is in that please just take care of yourselves, take care of your mental health. Do not listen to what everybody is telling you. Do your own research and find and resource yourself with the information that you need in order to make sure that you make the right decisions. Participate if you want to participate. Improve your life in the way that you see fit. Don't wait for other people to come with a white chariot in order to save you, because there is nobody here that is going to save you. Our government is failing us, and if you feel that you are galvanized enough by these opposition parties who have serious lack of empathy and compassion because they also want to be elite, then you make sure that you vote for whoever you feel that you need to vote for. But our opposition is sorely lacking, and it's the reason why that we are in this position in the first place. Opposition parties do better.
Sure.
I mean, there's a voting fatigue for most South Africans. We've been voting since 1994, and now 30 years later, what has changed? They have always exercising this right. So that's why a lot of people are disillusioned, and they do not trust politicians. By politicians, they do not want to participate in this empty ritual. You know, we must just come,
But guys, they've come out. We've got young people registering. The numbers have gone up. Isn't that encouraging?
Yes, it is encouraging in a way, and I'm coming to that point that obviously we are not going to isolate ourselves. You know, we're not going to say we're going to lock ourselves out because things are not working. We've got to do something. We've got to think about the future of this country. We need to find ways in which how we can participate, even if it means electoral approach. If that's the option that is available for us as young people, we can exercise that approach for us if we think that we do have better leaders at the moment. But all of these are the same faces that come from very one political party that have become 100 political parties. But these are the same people that have been doing the same thing over the years. So it's up to each individual to decide for themselves if voting is a working mechanism for them, and those who decide otherwise, so be it, because they don't feel represented in a way.
Are you voting?
Yes, I'm voting.
Are you voting?
No.
Not voting?
I will not be voting in this election until something changes with our political party system and the institutions and the opposition in place and their messaging. I will not participate in this election.
Qondiswa, are you voting?
I agree with Ayanda. I am not voting this election.
Darren, are you voting?
Yes, I am.